One of my closest friends growing up lived in a house that was beyond a reasonable doubt haunted. The house was definitely somewhere around a century old, or at least now it is, and our town was situated in a very woodsy suburb. He and every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our friends had their own experiences there, and I had my own too. Honestly, it would be impossible to try and condense it down into one experience, and I believe it's worth sharing the accounts I can remember. I'll start with the least scary one, which was thankfully my own, and then move on to the ones worth telling. During high school, my parents went on a vacation, and for a few days I stayed at this particular house of my friend. Let's call him Paul. I stayed in Paul's room in his sleeping bag on the floor while he slept on his bed. One morning, I woke up to someone whispering in my ear, like directly into my ear. They were whispering, "Connor, you need to leave now." It didn't sound super malicious or anything, almost more of a warning. It definitely woke me up though. Immediately, I thought it was Paul messing with me, as he frequently did, but I turned around to my right where he was sleeping and realized that he was completely out. I said "what" to him, thinking he was joking around, but he didn't wake up. He was definitely asleep. It was quiet and still too early for even Paul's parents to be up. Then it hit me, as it still hits me today. I heard the whisper in my left ear, and Paul was on my right side. Paul had other experiences in that same room, a few I can remember off the top of my head. For some time, he told me that he suffered from sleep paralysis on a consistent basis. He would see demons in his room and he would be unable to move. He told me that very frequently, in his sleep, the standing fan by his bed would become a demon, and he would wake up with a jolt of adrenaline, having punched or thrown the fan down to the ground. He told me he would sometimes see someone standing in the closet his bed faced, both asleep and awake. Oddly enough, his sleep paralysis significantly decreased as soon as he moved out of that place. That floor, the second floor, where Paul, his parents, and two of his four sisters slept, was spooky. I remember always getting weird feelings up there. One of his sisters claimed to see the ghost of a little boy in their bedroom. His mom once opened the closet door in her bedroom to find the same little boy standing there, looking up at her, asking for his mom. I heard about that one when I was in middle school, and it's always creeped me out. It's always scarier when the adults see them too. Before my own experience, I generally thought Paul was trying to mess with me when he would tell me about these other experiences. Most of our friends were the same way, thinking Paul was full of it. Even after my own experience, at times I thought I just as easily could have dreamt it up. But then, a few of those same friends, some of them complete non-believers beforehand, had their own experiences, and that changed my whole idea on the house. Once a year, Paul and his family would take a trip and have someone take care of their two dogs. One of our mutual friends came over to do just that one day. When she got there that evening to feed the dogs, the house was dark and empty. For some context, the dogs were being fed near the kitchen, and adjacent to the kitchen was the dining room, which led further away into the entryway, and after that, a small living room. Well, not long after feeding the dogs, she heard a blood-curdling scream. No, more like a shriek coming from that living room, like someone was inside with her. She booked it outside with those dogs, checked for intruders, and saw that there was no one there. I'm pretty sure after that, she called Paul and told him what happened. He just laughed and said, yeah, stuff like that happens sometimes. A couple years later, one of the bigger doubters in our group, who thought all of us were full of it, had his own experience. Paul hosted a fair amount of parties back then, and usually we would use his basement to avoid any sort of noise complaints. So all of us are in the basement, having a good time, and this particular friend of ours decides to run up and grab another drink from upstairs. Mind you, this friend is not the kind of guy to get completely hammered. Like, he'll only have 1 or 2 beers at most. So for all intents and purposes, he's sober. He goes up to the ground floor, which was empty because everyone was in the basement. There was a porch directly outside the dining room, which extended across the whole back of the house. As our friend starts walking into the dining room to grab a beer off the table, he sees a tall, grim-looking woman standing on the porch outside. Looking through the window directly at him, he knows something is wrong because she's sort of featureless and also standing outside by herself, looking inside. He takes his eyes off her for a moment. He looks back and she's gone. A few days later, he tells Paul what happened, and Paul tells him how he and his siblings have seen that same woman before. Our friend becomes a believer. The basement was creepy. as most are, but I can only think of one thing that ever happened down there. It was more of a storage cellar than anything. We just used it for parties and just generally hanging out. But it was so cluttered with random stuff that whole areas of the room were completely cut off. At some point in college, one summer when I was back home, Paul and his family were doing the annual cleaning of the basement, and he openly invited some friends to come and help. I came one day, and when I got there, Paul's dad nonchalantly told me that you get to see the secret room. Turns out that in the far corner of the basement, behind a bunch of clutter, was a little storage closet that nobody, besides Paul and maybe Paul's parents, knew about. We investigated it that day and found a bunch of old random antiques. I can't remember everything exactly. I don't even know if Paul's family knew what all this stuff was, but among all of it, I specifically remember finding this very old-fashioned vintage music box. You know, like the one in The Conjuring with the dancing ballerina? That kind of thing. We decided that, it was creepy and we didn't want anything to do with it and left it in that closet. Well, on a different day, when I thankfully was not there, Paul and another friend were cleaning at the basement when suddenly that same music box started playing by itself from behind the door of the closet. They were alone in the house all day and weren't anywhere near that closet. They both bolted upstairs. At the top of the house were the two small bedrooms, both belonging to Paul's older sisters. This is the last one I'll share, as it's the story that stuck with me the longest. The second oldest sister once had a vivid and intense dream in which she herself was being exorcised. A demon was being forced out of her as a group of priests were standing over her convulsing body, shouting prayers at her, and she remembered it just being crazy and intense. After enduring this for some time, she suddenly jolts herself awake and yells. At the same precise moment, a rosary she kept hanging on her wall flies from its place and crashes to the floor, and shatters into a bunch of pieces completely on its own. She was drenched in sweat and completely terrified. No one else was in the room. Yeah, that place is definitely haunted. My wife and I liked to road trip up in the Smoky Mountains. This trip, we had visited the home of Sergeant York at Pall Mall, Tennessee, and bought some wine at a local winery near there before going on to Gatlinburg late that night. Every hotel along the strip was full, and we were giving up hope when we came to the next to the last one. We always fly by the seat of our pants on our road trips, and I was beginning to think that it backfired on us this time, and we might have to sleep miles out in a fleabag place. I was worried and tired. The River House Motor Lodge was just on the other side of Pigeon River. It was quite big and it had lots of rooms, but when I went to the front desk, the high school-looking young man said there were none left. I was defeated looking, I'm sure. As I turned to leave, he hesitantly said, "Well, there is one." Yes, anything, I told him. I was thinking it was going to be some overpriced suite, but it was actually pretty decently priced. He pulled out an old-fashioned key and handed it to me. I was so relieved and happy to pay. Room 237 was on the top floor, a few rooms from the very end, and it was big. Double queen beds, a huge fireplace, and a balcony. The decor was 1970s, green shag carpets, Sears paintings, quilted coverlets. It looked like it had never been updated since the place was built. It was great for a couple who teened in that period. We ate cheese and drank wine on the balcony to the sound of the gurgling river below. We even fed the trout with crackers and left cheese on the rail for squirrels, but it was early November and cold, so we went inside to sit on the large flat stone hearth in front of the fire. One thing led to another, and we did what the hearth was likely made so large for. After breaking in the hearth, we moved to the bed. We loved each other very deeply. 2 bottles of wine had made us drowsy, so it was only natural for us to fall asleep in each other's arms. Just as I was going under, I felt the bed sink behind me, and I felt my wife crawl against my back to spoon me from behind. She was ice cold. I could feel her body pressed against mine, and it was freezing. Did she come in from the balcony? We had both stopped smoking at that time, so there was no reason for her to be out there. I was annoyed and about to grumble when I realized that she was asleep in front of me. I was fully awake, sitting up, staring into the shadows of the room. That wasn't good enough, so I got up and I checked under the 2 beds, the bathroom, as well as the lock on the door and the balcony. What else could I do? It had to be a dream, one of those lucid things. I had never had one, but I heard that they seem really real. After around 45 minutes of flickering firelight and wind and noise outside, I drifted off to sleep again. I woke up about an hour later freezing. There was no covers on the bed, none. I looked to one side, nothing. The other, nothing. The end of the bed, nothing. I couldn't have woken up in a Kansas cornfield and been more puzzled. It had to be somewhere. I got up and searched the entire room. Nothing. I went to the bathroom. Nothing. I looked behind the shower curtain. Nothing. I went over every corner and cabinet. I even unlocked and looked out on the balcony, even over the edge in case my wife had sleepwalked and thrown them over for some crazy reason. Still nothing. All I could think to do was go back inside and take the covers off of the other bed and use those. As I was walking back to the bed, I noticed the corner of the comforter peeking from underneath the bed. They were stuffed under it. Why? What would make? How? My wife was solid asleep. I hadn't been able to wake her up to even ask her about it. I covered the bed again and crawled back in. I was concerned and I made sure to check on her that her breathing was okay. What else could I do but go back to sleep? It was 1 a.m. An hour later, I wake up again, freezing. This time, I knew where to look, but that didn't exactly make me feel better. It's as if it was hearing my thoughts and said, "Oh, don't believe it the first time? Well, how about now?" I got up and made the bed as tight as I could. Hospital corners, the works. You could bounce a quarter off of it. I still recall basic training. I stood there and decided that that wasn't enough. I built the fire to a roar and stood in front of it. Not knowing what else to do, I said these words aloud. "I know you're lonely, but I have to get some sleep. I'm sorry, but I'm tired. I wish you peace." Then I eased my way under the covers and slept the rest of the night undisturbed. The next morning, I told my wife about it. She was amazed that she missed it all. There's a picture I took of her gleeful smile sitting on the bed. In the light of day, it was a funny story. I laughed too, but I tempered mine with how I felt that night in the darkened room, firelight playing over everything. She called down for breakfast to be sent up. They told her that nobody was supposed to be in that room. "Well, there is, so send it," she said. Then she turned at me wide-eyed and mimicked the Twilight Zone theme. Breakfast came, we ate, took one last ride on the hearth, then checked out. As I'm writing this, I decided to look up the lodge. It turns out that it burned down in 2016 from wildfires. I hope whatever we spent the night with that night finally found whatever peace it was needing. I know it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but it's 100% what happened to me about 24 years ago. When I was still relatively newly married, my then husband and I moved into a townhouse-style apartment. The 2 floors of our apartment were on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the building, and the management office and the mailbox area was almost directly below us on the ground level. This will be important for later. The woman who managed the building, let's call her Juno, was older. She didn't care for the property well and usually spent most of her days chain smoking Camel non-filters in her office and being a hateful old racist. She really resented that we had the townhouse, claiming that we lied about me being pregnant when I moved in because she didn't want to rent that unit to people with children. She also made a few disparaging remarks about my husband due to his race. She was really a peach, truly. So, after the kiddo was born, I was a stay-at-home mom, just busy keeping the house clean and the baby occupied. Without a car or other local moms or friends in the area, there wasn't much to do. So one day after lunch, the kiddo needed a bath. Anyone who's fed a 9-month-old baby knows the mess that can happen. So I went upstairs and ran the tub. Soon, I had the baby sitting happily, splashing in one of those suction cup bath seats. Important to note, it's the middle of winter and we had no heat, an issue I'd been fighting Juno about for a while, among other maintenance issues, like my arcing ceiling fan or the garbage disposal that was held on with duct tape and leaked. We basically had to keep a space heater or 2 in every room to keep the chill off. I had taken one of the space heaters out of the bedroom to keep the bathroom warm enough for bath time and had it sitting out of reach and splashing distance on top of the bathroom counter. I was standing in the bathtub getting ready to lift the baby out when all of a sudden the space heater started to rock back and forth when it had not been rocking before. I had this horrible feeling of dread as I looked at the heater and I just reacted because I knew I couldn't get us both out of the tub in time. As fast as I could, I reached down to grab the baby seat only to end up pulling it up off of the bathtub and dropping the baby over the side of the tub onto the bathroom floor. Just as the heater got to the end of the cord, it thumped into the shower door, bounced off the edge of the tub, and landed on its side on the floor a couple inches away. It had a safety latch on the bottom of it that would trigger if it got tipped over. When I looked over into the corner of the bathroom, that part of the room seemed to get just a little darker. like it was filling up with shadows. There was no smoke, no changing of lighting, no windows, no sun going behind a cloud. It was just darker. I also started to smell cigarette smoke, a very specific cigarette smoke. Camel, non-filters, which I knew the smell of well from being in Juno's office all of the time, getting things fixed. The smell was so thick, it made me cough and my chest ache, but I couldn't see any smoke, and I felt this overwhelming sensation of hatred and malice, like someone was standing there giving me a death glare. I grabbed the baby and a towel and ran downstairs. I was so freaked out. I couldn't bring myself to go back up there, so I used some diapers from the diaper bag and I kept the baby wrapped up in a towel and cuddled up to stay warm. I stayed down there the entire rest of the day until my husband got home. Every so often, I'd look up the stairs at the bathroom, but I didn't want to take the baby up there, and I was afraid to leave him alone downstairs. When my husband asked why the baby wasn't dressed, I told him about the heater and the smoke in the bathroom. He went upstairs to check it out, figuring it was yet another maintenance issue, but there was no electrical issue, no damage to the outlet, no smoke, no cigarette smell. He put the heater back on the counter and turned it on, watched it for a few minutes, and it didn't rock, so there's no way it could have rocked itself off of the counter earlier. He came back downstairs laughing it off, but later that day, we heard Juno's adult son downstairs near the mailboxes yelling his head off, and that's how we found out. She had a massive heart attack earlier that day. He found her in her chair with a Camel non-filtered still in her hand.